Hello everybody. Today we are going to be doing another topic video. This week I'm doing more of your hot takes because there were a lot of them from last week. Before I do that, I will plug, as always, my website. It is deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist. I do commission portraits. I sell prints of my work. If that's something that you are interested in, you can always go to the website, to the shop specifically, and if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below. All right, you guys always have good ones, I think. Here's a hot one. Feature film length and structure feels played out and restricting in regards to storytelling. The formula can only be manipulated so far, which leads to shallow storytelling and character development when compared to other forms. There are some fantastic limited run series out there that really expose the feature length film for what it is, a dated, inferior form of storytelling in today's world. P.S. I love movies, just trying to stir the pot and hear people's thoughts. Actually, though I do somewhat disagree with you, I'm really glad that you're saying this because I think it's something that people have pondered since the golden age of television began to develop. Admittedly, around the time when you have great shows in America, such as, The Sopranos being, what I consider maybe the best, and then you have like Breaking Bad and Mad Men, The Wire, those kinds of shows, they do tend to expose, I think, the lack of good writing that is in Hollywood, how a lot of the great writing is now in television. And I do know what you mean. I absolutely agree with you because a lot of times, yes, feature-length films, when you're trying to encompass a work that is really, really big, has lots of stuff, it makes more sense for it to be a mini-series, a limited series, or just, a series. And I think that we're seeing more and more of that, obviously. But, I look at something like Lord of the Rings. Wouldn't that be a perfect series? Obviously, Game of Thrones. It makes much more sense for that to be a series than movies. That would be, near impossible. And I do think you're right that it has exposed certain aspects of filmmaking, but I think just more typical Hollywood filmmaking where everything is crammed into a very specific arc that happens, really quickly. But, when I look at television as an example, especially like Netflix series or series that you can just watch at any point, like they release the whole thing all at once and you can just kind of, go through it at your leisure, chip away at it. To me, it feels like novels, it's the same thing where it's like you pick up a book whenever you don't want to read anymore, you got something to do, you put it down and you can pick it up at any point that you'd like to. So I really kind of equate it to that. You look at books, there's a lot of books that people do think are much better than the movie, but at the same time, there are certain things that only could be a film. And I think there are plenty of films like that. Cinematic experiences that work in a feature-length sort of setting, and they are specific to that. So yes, even though I do agree with you, I think everything has its strength. Film has its strength. Obviously books have their strength. Television has its strength. However, I just think because television overall is just better than a lot of the writing that we see in Hollywood, and hence we're seeing so many movie stars going over into TV. I think that's part of why a lot of that is being exposed. What do you think of how many female directors are making films compared to at the start of the century? Love your work. Thank you very much. I don't really care. I just really look at people based on their merit, not their gender. South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, is one of the best and most original musicals in the last 30 years. It has some truly catchy and very memorable musical songs such as robbed of the best song by Phil Collins' Two Worlds in Tarzan. Are you serious? Oh wow, I didn't know that. I guess I'm not surprised. It's the Oscars, but the same cannot be said for a lot of musicals made since. While some of them are pretty good, like La La Land, for example, I find the vast majority of them lacking catchy and memorable musical numbers, which is what we generally want the most with this genre. Well, I think it depends. It's the type of musical. Like La La Land is a type of musical. To harken back to a lot of the cinematic musicals of the golden age of musicals and then kind of showing it in a modern setting, how it's sort of decaying. That is the whole point of that. But this obviously is going to be more in like a Mel Brooks sort of feel. That's what Trey Parker and Matt Stone do for the most part, and they love the musical genre because of that, more for comedic purposes, more for the satire. Hence why a musical like Book of Mormon, which they did on Broadway, was such a huge success, is because it had a lot of what makes them really great. And yes, I think that South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut is very, very underrated. I guess like as a cinematic work. I know it has its fans for sure, but I feel like, we talk about Book of Mormon as this great thing. You rarely hear about Bigger, Longer, and Uncut on the list of great musicals made. I genuinely think it is. I think it is just, it is so funny. And I think it's refreshing because so many of the musicals today are, you know, more like the Les Miserables and the Cats, like revivals of such. I like these more fresh ideas. You know, we don't see that very often. Chungking Express uses California Dreaming to the point of annoyance. Oh dear. I know, I kind of understand what you're saying. And, you know, there are a lot of movies, like, you know, I think about like, you know, House or Hausu, you know, of course, the famous Japanese horror comedy, and the theme that plays throughout that movie, you know, on the piano, it just goes over and over and over and over and over. And it feels like it's going to kind of drive you insane. But part of that I feel like is, you know, kind of the point. But with Chungking Express, I think it's you know, it's a very unique movie. And I do think that, yes, for certain people, that song might get on their nerves as it plays. But for me, there's something about it where it kind of brings you in to the experience of the movie more, or brings you into the experience of that character. That song is so representative of who that character is, this sort of dreamy sort of person living in another, you know, living maybe outside of her reality in a sense. And so much of that film is about the sensory. But for me, as the song plays, the more it goes, the more it sort of kind of seeps into your being. And that song, while it is very beautiful, it has a very melancholy tone to it. So there is just something about, you know, kind of this blissful quality, this hopeful quality, this sweetness, as well as this melancholy tone. And just the repetition of it, again, somehow it just really seeps into your being in a way that I find very unique. So for me, it really works. But I totally understand. You know, like I reviewed The Third Man the other day, and I talked about how I originally hated the score for that film. And then I grew to love it the more that I watched it. And I realized a lot of people don't like the score. So I guess it really just depends on your personal taste. Rom-com genre is the best genre. I'm going to assume, based on your emojis, that you're being cheeky there. I mean, I don't agree, though. I do think that most of the great romantic comedies came out of a certain era, and came out of the 1930s and the 40s, in Hollywood at least. Those are some of the greats. And I do think that romantic comedies, or just comedies in general, are some of the hardest to do. They're the hardest to write, and they're the hardest to capture tonally. So I really do miss that. I miss when romantic comedies were really great. Call Me By Your Name is a lifeless slog that gets fetishized by straight girls for being aesthetically pleasing. I don't know about the second half fully, but God, I totally agree with you. I hated Call Me By Your Name. And I'm like one of the only people who did. I remember when it came out, so many people were like, oh my God, it's so powerful. You're gonna love it. And that speech that the dad gives at the end, oh, it brought me to tears. I watched it. I had to force myself to stay awake during it. It was such a slog, as you say. It was painfully slow. I never felt any sense of love, never felt any chemistry between Armie Hammer and Timothée Chalamet. I don't know. I am not a fan of Luca Guadagnino. I struggle a lot with his, you know, just kind of his point of view, his style. But yeah, I don't know. It felt like a really kind of skeletal, very artsy for the sake of being artsy kind of experience for me. That's another one where it's been a long time since I've seen it. Maybe I wasn't in the right headspace at the time. Who knows? But I just remember thinking this is severely overrated. I personally think that Funny Games is the superior version of the film. As much as I love the original, I think it's obvious that the version of Haneke, who made Funny Games in 2007, is the same version that had already made Cachet and The Piano Teacher, while in 1997 he was only a few films in. The cinematography and the color grading is much more improved, and the whites of all the boys' outfits in particular really stand out, almost to the point where it feels like a mental hospital or something. And the performances are all improved and bring a new level of depth to all the characters. The family feels more intimate, believable, together in small interactions. The opening scene and the two boys have a new level of nuance and charisma missing from the original. And it makes for a much more visceral experience overall. Couldn't disagree more. I mean, is like a black and white difference between how we see things. I do think that, yes, there is an artificiality to the new one that is, you know, meant to kind of serve the style of the film. It is, of course, you know, meant to cater towards Americans. And, you know, it is meant to be more a commentary on Hollywood. And that's who we wanted to see the film. So I understand that. And I understand that the second one, or, you know, the remake, is closer to his particular vision. However, I do feel that the artificiality of it doesn't quite work in terms of when it's meant to resonate, because I like the idea of, in the original, it feels almost like the family is part of a more authentic, more maybe art house, kind of slower, poetic film, more intimate film, and then you have these two boys more from like an American film. And it's the juxtaposition of the two that I find to be really jarring, but also really interesting. And it makes the story of the family, to me, much more emotional. I think the acting is leaps and bounds better in the original. Honestly, do yourself a trick. Play them both together. Play them scene by scene. Watch the performance by the mother in the original and her shock. I mean, she plays it so real, more in a subtle way, whereas Naomi, wonderful actress, huge fan of hers. It's very, it's very Hollywood. They're excellent actors that they got, at least for the parents in the new film, and yet I think they're a little too Hollywood. I mean, really, just play the scene, that, of course, that long take after the killers leave the first time. Watch just that shot. Of course, it's like, what, 8-10 minutes long? Watch the difference between the two performances. Really, I mean, if you're more moved by the new one, okay, but to me, I just, I can't personally understand it. They're more open, I think, to, some of the scary places that one can go in a performance like that. They're less afraid of the emotion and the physicality. The two boys I do really like in the new film. I think they're very funny, but I think there's something about more of the subtlety as well as the cheekiness in the original that, to me, just feels more sophisticated and more scary, really. I mean, really, for me, the original is much more scary. And to me, it captures enough of the American spirit that it's satisfying enough. Whereas the other one feels just kind of more false. But, it totally depends on the person, because I've noticed a lot of people have mixed feelings. So it is interesting. Ari Aster is a brilliant director. When you have the likes of Eggers and Cosmatos out there, Aster doesn't hold up. Hereditary was not nearly as good as the hype. Midsommar was good, but still had a bit of frat BS going on. I like pure art house horror Eggers delivers. I like Aster. I think he's fantastic. And I'm always interested in a new film that he has, but I do agree. I don't think he's quite achieved maybe his potential quite yet. I think that he's excellent with tone, excellent at capturing a sort of retro, late 70s, 80s sort of Wicker Man, Shining sort of thing, but in a fresh way. Or I should say, in a way that is very specific to him. But I just kind of think that sometimes, like especially with Hereditary, I struggled a lot with the third act of that film and where it went just logistically. Didn't really make that much sense. And I think if it did, I think the film could have been a masterpiece. Midsommar I've only seen once. I've never seen the director's cut or anything like that. I admire it very much from an artistic standpoint, but I did, from what I recall, I struggled a little bit with certain aspects of the story. But I don't want to say that he's overrated. I think he's very interesting, and we're lucky to have him. It is tough, like with Eggers, big fan of like The Witch. I've seen that film many times. I think it's absolutely fantastic. One of the better horror films to come out of the last few years. And then Lighthouse as well. I think I might, and it's not like I'm deep into these people's work, so I couldn't give like a really thoughtful reason for my decision, but just kind of, on the outset, I think I might like Eggers a little bit more. I think he's a little bit more consistent with the ideas overall. And I am a huge Cosmatos fan. I know he's really only made 2 films, but I love his style. There's something about it that is, more specific to my aesthetic, my taste, what I really like out of my films. But yeah, I don't know if he's a brilliant director, so I might, agree with you there. Maybe he is, and we just haven't seen that quite yet. But I do think he's excellent. So not to diss him. But anyway, those are some of your answers. Thank you guys so much again for writing in. And that is the video. I'm going to give a shout out, as always, to my patrons. Thank you guys so much for everything. If you are interested in becoming a patron, the link to support that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.